there.
Hey everybody, my name is Paul Doherty. I'm one of the buying specialists here at Florida Real Estate Buyers, joined with my fellow buying specialist Alex and Aton, our co-founder, and Gabe, our CEO. Today, we're really discussing one of the things that we as a company specialize in, which is inherited properties, and finding and sharing with people their rights to a property if they've inherited one. We have a lot of experience in this. This is one of the things that we do every day. We see it all the time. So many different scenarios come to mind just thinking about it. But really today we want to cover kind of the situations where someone might inherit a property and what that might look like in the state of Florida. So we'll cover that and really. When we get into this, there's kind of two different flow charts for succession of a property, and one is going to have if it's a homestead property, and the other would be obviously if it's not a homestead property. So frequently, what we do is we reach out, we find out that someone has passed and left an estate, and people might want to sell that property, and they reach out to us and wonder what their rights are. And obviously, we ourselves are not attorneys, but we've been doing this for 10 years now, and we actually partner with a law office. So, we'll just go over the Florida statutes here and share with you kind of the process that we go about when we run into someone and they want to know what their rights are for a property. Um, so first I'll do, if it's not a homestead property here, let me see if I can share my screen. Perfect.
Also, I just want to add too, Paul. That was great, but if somebody has a will or if a property is owned in a trust, this really doesn't apply. But I would say most of the people who we end up working with, I'd say 90% easily don't have a will and the property is not owned in a trust.
That's a great point. Yeah, and I speak with a lot of people the first thing they kind of say to me, well, there's not a will, and to your point, you don't need a will, and frequently, there is no will. So really, what I'll be covering today is kind of the way this process works without a will. So a will would allow someone who's deceased to leave the property to someone in particular, and if that doesn't exist, then this is kind of what we'd be looking at as far as deciding who has rights to the property. So. This graphic here is really an outline of if the property was not a homestead property for the person who had passed. So the first thing we always look at is does the decedent have a spouse? If the answer is yes, do they have children? And from that point on, are the children related to the spouse? If they are, then the spouse inherits 100% of the estate. And if it's not, then the spouse shares 50% of the estate with the decedent's children. Which is actually a story we have. And we've just finished working with someone, and that was a situation. It was really, really interesting to come and find the children after all those years. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But if they don't have children, then the spouse would inherit 100% of the property. So that covers the left side of the flow chart there if the spouse is involved. Now, if the person who passed did not have no spouse, if they have children, then this is pretty simple. The children inherit 100% of the estate. If not, then it goes up to the parents. Do they have parents? If yes, their parents are still alive. The parents inherit 100% of the estate. Um, Frequently, the parents have already passed as well. So then it would go down to siblings again. And siblings inherit 100% of the estate at that point. If they don't even have siblings, so if we've gone to this point through all this, and they don't have a spouse, children, parents, or siblings, at that point, we look to the extended paternal and maternal family, so aunts, uncles, that kind of thing. And if that is the case, then the estate is divided 50-50 between paternal and maternal family per stirpes. So that just means literally 50% on each side, 50% on the other side, no matter how many aunts or uncles are on each. So it just gets split in half. And if that's not the case, then the state of Florida gets the estate if there's no surviving family.
So the part that really spoke to me there, or the part that was maybe the most confusing to me, when I personally first started assisting families with this, if you go back to the left, so it says, do they have children? It goes down from there. Are the children related to the spouse? And that's the kind of question you hear, and it's almost like, well, what does that even mean? For that one specifically, that would be the case where, let's say you're in a position where your father passes away, and you have a stepmother, right? Things are a little bit different when that's not your biological mother. right? If your father passes away and there's no will, you and your siblings will end up splitting a 50% right to that property with the stepmother, stepfather, whatever the case is, if there's no direct biological relation there. So that's what that question means there. If you're reading that and you're a little confused, but are the children related to the spouse?
That's awesome. And Paul, do you mind if Alex shares situation with Birkinshaw and goes?
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
please.
one.
And that's the one I was thinking of when I was talking about this on the left side with the spouse shares 50% of the estate with the children. So yeah, why don't
That's
you go
how.
ahead?
That's
And
how I
then-
learned that. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then Alex, just give like a brief overview. Someone calls in,
Sure.
we connect with somebody. From that point, there's questions, etc. How does that whole conversation go? Because that's who's watching this video right now.
Sure. So that's unrelated to the specific scenario, correct? Just how the process goes when somebody reaches out. So
yeah, and that's that specific scenario coupled with how the process works.
great. So typically, the way the process would work, somebody knows either through a friend or online, a YouTube video, something on Facebook that they know who we are and they know what we do in this community. So maybe their father or any family member passed away. They live in another state, right? They'll call us. They'll say, typically they're looking for Gabe, and then I'll explain who I am, or Paul will explain who he is. We'll go through the process, and their question is typically going to be, is this property mine? If it is, do I have any liability, or what do I even have to do next to make it mine? Right. So then we go through essentially what Paul just showed. We get a description of the entire situation. Was there a will? Was there no will? And as Aton, well, I'm sure we'll explain, sometimes there's a will, and that unfortunately ends up not even mattering at the end. So that's an unfortunate part of this as well. But basically what we do is we get your entire situation. We write it out on a sheet of paper from beginning to end, making sure we miss no family, no piece of paper, anything that's pertinent to the situation. We speak amongst ourselves, make sure that we've exhausted every possibility possible. And then we'll have a second conversation where we explain how we can solve any of the problems that have been presented to you, right? And that call may be as simple as, sir, I'm sorry, but you actually have no right to this property. Or maybe it's not an I'm sorry, maybe it's you have nothing to worry about, there's nothing for you to do here, right? So essentially the first conversation will be making sure we understand and outline everything you're going through. Typically there will be a second conversation where we outline how we can solve any problems that have been presented in your life based on the situation you've been put in. And to tie it back to the situation that we were speaking about a little bit earlier. So I received a call, it was on a Thursday or a Friday, really nice lady saying she wants to sell her property. As far as we can see, she's the only owner of the property. So that begun this in a situation where we didn't even realize that an estate had to be settled. Dating back 20 years or so, there was a mistake when they deeded the property to her. They did it in the last name. So it went back to the last deed prior to that, which was actually her husband. So now it's a scenario where she never legally owned the property. She was trying to sell property owned in the estate of her husband, right? And that seems, no big deal. They're married, right? Come to find out, that wasn't legally the case either. So essentially the next thing we realized is we need to figure this out. There was actually another company that she had been working with, and she reached out to us because they stopped answering her calls. Essentially, as soon as they came across the information that we came across, which was that she didn't actually own the property. Her husband owned the property, and he had an estranged family that she'd never met. So now the legal breakdown of this was she owned 50% of the property, and the estranged children of her husband owned the other 50% of the property. So this is where what Gabe and Aton have built here and empowered me and Paul to do. We were able to use the tools they've provided, the resources they've provided, to find two estranged children who lived in New York, hadn't spoken to their father in over 40 years, didn't attend the funeral, didn't know where he lived or that he owned a property. And we actually found the. Do you want me to go specifically how we
Yeah.
found them, Gabe?
Yeah.
Okay, so we actually found the son of this gentleman through reaching his wife, who we found out about through their wedding pamphlet. We found their wedding online, found his wife because he wasn't answering because, who are we? I'm that way too. I don't answer a phone call if I don't know the number. So we ended up getting in touch with his wife, explained the situation to her. The next day, we got in touch with one of the brothers. It seems like from there, maybe a week later, we proved everything we were explaining, showed we're a reputable company, showed why they had a right to this property, why they legally had the right to sell the property. And then we purchased half of the property from them. They came across a large amount of money that they didn't know existed. And then the owner of the property, her goal was, not to make $1 bazillion. So it wasn't a terrible thing for her either. It was just to be able to take care of herself for the next 5 years. So everybody's situation was handled. And this was one where another company who, I won't use the name, but is a bigger company, and they stopped talking to her altogether because of the problem that was presented.
And they stopped talking to her because their focus is not to rectify complicated situations like this, but that's exactly what the focus of our company is. So that's why it comes across as so strange in the initial conversation of what is this all about? Well, that's what we do. We piece this all together like detectives, connect the dots, and say, here's what it is. What do you want to do? And then it's up to the customer, right? Cool.
Yeah, because and to that point, Gabe, we often get lumped into that group of home buyers where we're looking to rehab a property, or we're looking to look for a fix and flip or a rental or something like that. And the case is that we are, but our core strength is not in construction. Our core strength is in working with sellers who have complicated situations, things that other people aren't able to fix. So, all things being equal, all companies, can rehab a house the same, put in a new kitchen and bathrooms and things and flooring and paint. But sometimes the companies where they specialize in that stuff aren't really necessarily equipped to handle a situation like this. So.
Right. And I was going to say, I'm not going to speak for Gabe and Aton, but it might be the same for them. Most people I speak with in the position that this lady was in, they don't even realize a company like ours exists, right? They think they need to solve two problems. They need to go to a lawyer, figure out the estate. What the heck am I going to do? And then after that, they think they need to find a real estate company. Gabe and Aton have created a solution here where we can solve both problems all under the same roof, with really essentially pain free for the person going through it.
That's awesome. Great. You want to close it out, Paul?
Yeah. We'll just briefly cover the homestead succession flow chart here. I'll share my screen again.
And before you do the homestead too, we've gotten some calls recently about homestead properties where the husband owned the property and was married to the wife, but the wife's name was not on the deed. And so Paul's going to cover that, but this seems to be kind of a common thing that we've been encountering recently where people think, well, if the husband passes away or if the wife passes away, then everything goes to the spouse. And that's not the case with real estate on homestead property if the wife is not on the deed. So it's very important to note that.
Yeah, thank you, Aton. Great point. So that's why there's actually two different flow charts for a non-homestead and then here a homestead property. You can see this one. I can zoom in a little bit on my end. definitely has some. It's got some case law on it here from previous Florida cases in real estate, and this one is definitely a little bit more crowded, just because it's got a little bit more complication to it, but it's still really straightforward if you look at it. So, um, just looking at an overview on the right here describes everything that would happen if it's a homestead property. So the first question here really is, was the property decedent's homestead? If yes, you go down. Was decedent survived by a minor child? So you can see it's already the first difference here between non-homestead to homestead property is, if you remember on the other one, it asked about spouse first. Here it's asking about minor child. So if yes, then we go over to the box on the right. By operation of law, life estate to spouse, if any, with remainder, or fee simple if no spouse, or if waiver of spousal rights or spousal disclaimer to descendants in being. So Eitan, do you want to break down what that means a little bit?
Sure. So a waiver of spousal rights is like a prenup or a postnup. So if they're asking if there was a if the spouse said, "Hey, I'm disclaiming my right to this." So the first thing is that if there's a minor child, then the minor child gets they get all the benefit. And a life estate means that the person who has the life estate can live there for the rest of their life, but then the ownership goes back to whoever owned it before. So so let's say you have a husband and wife, but the husband was on the deed and the wife was not on the deed, then the husband's and they have a minor child, then the wife gets to live there for the rest of her life, and then all of the proceeds then go to the child.
Exactly. So that's if yes. If no, we go down again to level 3. Was decedent survived by a spouse? If yes, we go over to the right. Was descendant's entire homestead devised to spouse? That's yes, and the spouse takes descendant's entire interest. If no, was there a valid waiver of spousal rights? So like Eitan mentioned, a prenup perhaps, something of that nature. If no, was decedent survived by descendants? Again, if no, we follow that arrow. Spouse takes decedent's entire interest. If yes, spouse takes in a life estate with remainder in fee simple to descendants in being. So exactly what Eitan just mentioned and broke down.
So what the government or what the laws were created to do was they don't want to kick a spouse out of the home because their spouse has passed away. So they want to make sure that everybody has a roof over their head. But there's a difference between having a roof over your head and being able to collect, $100,000 or $500,000 on the proceeds of a property. So they want to make sure that the spouse is taken care of, but that they don't get to have control over the money.
Exactly. So I'll scroll down farther here. We go to level 4. If the decedent was not survived by a spouse. Next question is, was decedent survived by heirs? If yes, was decedent's homestead devised even by the will or trust residuary? If no, decedent's intestate heirs take as tenants in common. And again, this one is much more kind of it's got a lot more legal jargon than the other one does. So this one is definitely one that we specialize in making this simple for people and helping them understand the entire process here. So Eitan, exactly what does that mean for descendants intestate heirs take as tenants in common?
Absolutely. So let's say there's 3 siblings and there was no spouse. So guy dies. He was on the deed. His wife was not on the deed, or his wife predeceased him, and he doesn't have a will. Then the property gets left to his 3 children, which is simple enough. But the descendants take title as tenants in common, which means that they take title separately. So they each own a third. And let's say, and unfortunately, we find out that one of the siblings has passed away, their share still exists. So just because they've passed away, if they have kids, then you have to go back through this chart or the other chart and determine whether or not they have children who then stand in their shoes. So if it's a third, and one of the siblings passes away and they have 2 children, then it's a third, a sixth, and a sixth.
So you can quickly see how, like Gabe mentioned earlier, how a lot of companies over here in real estate, it gets messy like this, and they don't want any part of it. It's not an easy transaction for them, whereas we pride ourselves in finding solutions for situations like this.
And the other thing too is that this is all laid out in the Florida statutes and the laws that have been created by our legislature for the state of Florida. So we talk to people where they say, well, this isn't fair. I've paid the taxes, or I've paid the mortgage, or I took care of my mom and all my siblings. None of them came until the funeral, and all they wanted to do was take the belongings. And my heart goes out to you. My heart goes out to these people who have been taking care of a property or taking care of a loved one. Unfortunately, we don't make the rules, and the laws govern how this works. And so we have to involve the siblings if there are siblings, and we have to involve a spouse if there's a spouse. And just because somebody wasn't involved in somebody's life during their lifetime, we still have to follow this, and then the judge is the one who gets to decide everything.
Yeah, well said. And then finally, level 6, the final on this piece of paper, this document. Was it devised to heirs listed in number 732103? And then if yes, devisees take title as devised.
And that's just if there's a will. So if there's a will, then
There's a way.
There's a way, exactly.
Yeah. And obviously we see and deal with inherited properties all the time. We understand completely that it can either bring families closer together or push them farther apart. It's always our hope that it's always the first option and brings people closer together. And we do understand that's not always the case. So we do try our best to make these situations as stress-free as possible for families going through this. It's never our goal to add any more challenges or anything else to a situation like this. Yeah, so I'm glad we were able to cover inherited properties and going over who might have rights to a property when they've lost a loved one. Did anyone else have any questions about this or anything?
No, this was great. It was very informative, definitely educational. But the only things that I'm going to say is two last things. First, everyone's situation is different. And second, we are not attorneys. We're not acting as though we're attorneys or that we can legally say anything or what we're saying doesn't apply to anyone's particular situation. It's just a broad overview of how this system works. So what we can say is based on our experience, we can speak. Paul, Alex can get an overview of what the situation is. And then by us consulting with our attorneys at no cost to the customer, determine exactly what has to be done. So at least you know that. So great. Thank you guys very much. Excellent lesson. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.